take this opportunity to welcome you all and also thank my partners here, Father Anwu from St. Norbert College, Bev Merzer, who was here, who've done a lot of the coordination. So this is about the fifth or sixth year, I think, that UWGB and St. Norbert have collaborated on this. And it's a very exciting series for us to take part in and to hear about a lot of these wonderful topics. I did want to invite you to our next couple of talks. The next one, in fact, will be on March 26th, so also a Wednesday evening. And the topic of that will be America First 2.0, comparing Trump's economic and global policies across two administrations, from Professor Gracia Villarroel from St. Norbert College. She's a faculty member in political science. And then on April 9th will be the following one, also with foreign policy, American foreign policy at a crossroads, Professor Wendy Scattergood, also from St. Norbert. So mark your calendars for those. It should be very interesting and exciting topics. Tonight's topic is also very interesting and exciting and not directly related to maybe American foreign policy, but certainly American policy in some ways. And that has to do with something that I know in the education field and maybe in some of yours as well, has really been a hot topic, namely artificial intelligence, generative AI, ChatGPT, a lot of these types of things, and the connection to national security, the implications that artificial intelligence then have in a broader policy and the political sphere. And I'm very pleased to be able to welcome my colleague from UW Green Bay, Dr. Paul Bellinger, who is a professor of applied writing and English at UW Green Bay, where he teaches creative and professional writing. So prior to joining us at UWGB, he taught in Korea, Wales, and Australia. And his research interests include not only AI, but ideology mapping, which I'm actually not sure what that is, but maybe you'll talk about it. Utopian literature, creative studies, the digital humanities, and he has a current emphasis on harnessing the power of artificial intelligence in our professional lives. So we thought that he would be the perfect and ideal speaker for tonight's lecture. So without further ado, thank you, Paul.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Father. Thank you, Mary, Bev, St. Norbert's for having me here today. I will have to, at first, apologize. I will not be quite as animated as I normally would in the classroom because there is a lot of ground to cover. AI, as we're going to see, really is impacting every layer of our national security policy. So without further ado, let me welcome you, dear humans, to the era of artificial intelligence, the epoch of facsimile, the season of our cyborganization, and what may prove to be the age of psychosis. Welcome to this moment of great decisions, decisions that will shape our character, the thrust of our nation, and perhaps even humanity itself. Now, this is not to indulge in the overblown hype of the starry-eyed or the paranoid. Rather, the cynic in me agrees that none of these extremes are likely to manifest themselves. But it is impossible not to acknowledge that everything is changing. And in times of grave uncertainty, we are compelled to look backwards, not just to understand how we arrived at what seems a sudden inflection point, but to seek historical analogies that might help us comprehend what comes next. To this end, AI has been likened to Gutenberg's printing press, the Industrial Revolution, the rise of electricity, and the advent of the internet. More ominously, last year, the U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission, they invoked a starker parallel in explicitly calling for a Manhattan Project for AI. And here, to me, lies the historical illusion that lingers most uneasily at the edges of this discourse: AI's Oppenheimer moment. That point at which we realize, and unfortunately often too late, that we have built something irreversible, that in the wrong hands, no matter how well-intentioned, could reconfigure the very foundations of global order. In fact, in Genesis, Artificial Intelligence, Hope in the Human Spirit, Henry Kissinger, the architect of nuclear diplomacy, argues alongside the tech icons of Craig Mundie and Eric Schmidt that the invention of the bomb is indeed the closest we can come to historical precedent. However, unlike nuclear weapons, whose destructive power remained concentrated in the hands of a few, AI is rapidly dispersing. It is embedding itself into the structures that govern our societies, our economies, and perhaps even with the ability to alter how we think, how we feel, and how we decide. This is the black box problem, not just of AI's decision making, but of our own minds in an era of algorithmic mediation. To help guide us through the questions at hand, Fei-Fei Li, the godmother of AI, she set forth 3 principles for establishing a governance framework for artificial intelligence. And chief among these was that we should use science, not science fiction, in developing our AI policies. For effective policymaking demands a clear-eyed view of reality. Now, she is, of course, correct in this. But I suggest that because the questions are still being formed, the answers are necessarily hypothetical. And science fiction can thus act like the Department of Defense's war games and their playbooks for black swan events, events that increasingly involve artificial intelligence. Truly, the depth and the breadth of its potential impact is such that we lack clear historical precedent outside of science fiction. And we can't be blamed for turning to such illusions when we are being led by techno-utopians. For instance, at the close of the UK's 2023 AI Safety Summit, Elon Musk predicted a world where no job is needed. Sounds nice, right? And work is done for interest and curiosity and personal satisfaction. Well, the Trekkies in the audience, they might realize or recognize the idealistic hints of a post-scarcity economy here. Meanwhile, our younger crowd might recall the life of luxury humans achieved in Wall-E. Certainly, Thomas More, the author, the coiner of the term utopian, would likely suggest this all sounds pretty utopian to him. In fact, in laying out his vision for AI's transformative potential, Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, admits, yes, it sounds utopian, but it is something technology can deliver and in some cases already has. Now, of course, people like Musk and Altman, they have something to sell us. So they've a vested interest in bolstering our expectations and our desires. They're likewise notorious for overpromising and underdelivering, so that, like the hoverboard, we're still waiting for our hyperloops, our robo-taxis, and our all-inclusive lunar holidays. Now, no one, I would suggest, blames an earnest fellow for failing, for not living up to those sorts of promises. But when the titans of Silicon Valley step into the halls of government, their agendas are often couched in talk of innovation and of prosperity, behind which lie questions of influence and control. So do they truly envision a future where humanity thrives alongside intelligent machines? Or is this rhetoric a calculated attempt to mold our expectations and, by extension, our policies? Shouldn't we wonder about their motivations, their influences, and their aims? Now, luckily, we needn't look far to find the source code of their imaginations. For example, Mark Zuckerberg's metaverse is named for the augmented reality of Neil Stephenson's Snow Crash. Musk's chatbot has been dubbed Grok, which in Robert Heinlein's Stranger in a Strange Land means to drink, or more broadly, in the way it's really used in the novel, to understand something profoundly and intuitively. Perhaps much in the way that AI drinks up the wealth of human creation in order to replicate patterns we then imbue with meaning. And finally, though not exhaustively, the recently announced Stargate project is named for the advanced technology of Stanley Kubrick and Arthur C. Clarke's 2001 A Space Odyssey. In this work, the Stargate is a technology that processes and transmits alien knowledge. Most famously, it gives Moonwatcher, a primitive ape, the knowledge of how to use bone clubs to kill his enemies. Where's that Oppenheimer moment, right? I am become death. So, yes, tonight's conversation about AI and national security is focused on the technology and the policies as they exist. But I suggest we would be remiss to so simply dismiss these other, more fantastical maps of our futures. Rather, to quote Isaac Asimov, the important prediction is not the automobile, but the parking problem. It is not radio, but the soap opera. Not the income tax, but the expense account. Not the bomb, but the nuclear stalemate. Not the action, in short, but the reaction. Thus, we examine AI's impact on our national security from the battlefield to the ballot box, and from economic stability to ideological fragmentation, to understand this moment that we're in and to imagine the consequences. Will we create a future where strategic global AI governance stabilizes security and democracy? Or will we split at the seams, losing our shared identity and undermining that which we hold dear? Or what if the greatest threat of all is not an android Schwarzenegger, but buying into Silicon Valley's hype in the first place? To make sense of the security challenges at hand, I adopt a long-standing framework for US foreign policy, the 3D model: defense, diplomacy, and development. Defense, it requires us to confront cyber threats, autonomous warfare, and adversarial uses of these emerging technologies. Diplomacy, on the other hand, demands that we use AI to enhance our decision making, to shape global AI governance, and to navigate the ambitions of other nations. Development, likewise, then forces us to consider AI's role in economic competitiveness, technological leadership, and the workforce of the future. But I propose to you that AI is not just a weapon or a market force. It shapes minds, cultures, and political systems. And this is why we must introduce a fourth dimension: democratic stability. Indeed, AI's ability to retrain cognition, manipulate ideology, rewrite history, and fracture political discourse means that our security concerns extend to the very nature of governance, citizenship, and human agency. We thus stand at an inflection point, not unlike those imagined in science fiction. Whether it's the predictive analytics of Asimov's Foundation series, the corporate controlled dystopias of Gibson's Neuromancer, or the surveillance state in Philip K. Dick's Minority Report, we have been imagining AI's national security implications long before they have become real. The challenge now is in ensuring that these remain fictions. So while following the godmother of AI's advice to adopt a clear-eyed view of current reality, these narratives highlight our mind the gap moment, not just in AI capabilities, but policies and politics. Indeed, AI policy has shifted dramatically in the last year alone, and it has been shaped not just by the quickly evolving technology, but by competing visions of technological governance. Obama, whose administration borrowed the 3Ds from Bush's national security apparatus, was actually the first to have an official AI policy. This order established goals that focused on advancing American leadership and innovation, while also protecting our security, our civil liberties, and our economic well being. The Biden administration's 2023 executive order on AI took a similarly sort of robust approach, aiming to balance innovation with security. And in doing so, it fleshed out 8 key objectives. One, to ensure AI safety and security. Two, to promote responsible innovation, competition, and collaboration. Three, safeguarding our American workers. Four, advancing equity and civil rights. Five, protecting consumers and enforcing regulations. Six, defending privacy and civil liberties. Seven, enhancing AI governance within the federal government. And eight, strengthening US global leadership in AI. Truly robust, more robust than Asimov's 3 laws of robotics, right? Which were faulty on their face. Now, to accomplish these objectives, the order directed our federal agencies across government, all branches, to conduct studies on AI's economic, military, and ethical implications, while also mandating safety testing for our powerful frontier models. Until that time when we can figure out where the guidelines, the guardrails should exist for these technologies. And the timeline for doing this work stretched between 90 and 365 days. Now, given this timeline, this foundational research has been completed, the policy recommendations have been made, and all before the Trump administration replaced this order, came in and got rid of it, replacing it with a 2-page repeal. The executive order on removing barriers to American leadership in artificial intelligence. This repeal eliminated the clearest articulation of our national values and priorities to date, at least as it concerns AI. And it further removed public oversight of what even AI's biggest backers and builders claim are potentially cataclysmic technologies. Now, this about face leaves it clear that we have stepped into a new policy landscape, one with different promises and threats. Now, we can deduce some of these contours. Most evidently, that while Biden-era order emphasized risk mitigation, workforce development, civil liberties, and AI safety standards, Trump's position is closer to Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged in prioritizing deregulation and a free market philosophy. So I apologize for anything that's changed between today and when these lines were first crafted. Indeed, according to the most recent executive order, we should expect a fully articulated AI policy recommendation in the next 180 days. Perhaps they will set forth new and even more robust guidance, or maybe we'll revert to the Biden-era order, or perhaps it will be an AI free-for-all. But until this clearer picture emerges, here are the opportunities and the threats to our defense, diplomacy, development, and democratic stability, Asimov's parking problems, and nuclear stalemates, as best I can tell. Now, in the classical model of national security, defense is a measure of last resort. It is taken when development and when diplomacy have failed. It is the safeguard against existential threats, and the final option when all other avenues have been exhausted. And yet, if history and our spending priorities are any indication, it's probably the first thing that we imagine when it comes to national security. And this is not just because death is central to the human condition, but because we are a nation that has been forged in revolution, tempered in civil war, and honed through leadership in the great conflicts of the 20th century. This is a reality that is made clear by the fact that defense alone occupies 46% of the US discretionary spending, which likewise accounts for approximately 40% of the world's military budget and more than the next 9 highest spending countries combined. Through the directive of the Obama, Biden, and Trump administrations, the DoD has been focused on implementing AI into all of its processes. In fact, between 2022 and 23, the Department of Defense increased its AI research budget from 355 million to 4.6 billion. This was a staggering 1,200% jump in 1 year. And this is not a momentary surge. It is the foundation of a new arms race, a shift from steel and gunpowder to silicon and code. Now, just as we first imagined defense in terms of security, AI-enabled warfare likely summons the ghosts of our cultural programming. The sentinels, perhaps, from The Matrix, the robotic hounds of Fahrenheit 451, or Skynet's android army. But these are no longer merely works of fiction. AI targeting systems have been embedded in drone warfare for years. The US military already deploys robot dogs for base patrol, reconnaissance, and explosives disposal. And humanoid robots, while not yet enlisted in the armed forces, are on their way. Beyond this, China is working on AI-guided munitions. Russia is hyping an AI-driven exoskeleton. Australia is building autonomous subs. AI-powered drones are loose in the UK, and the Pentagon has begun testing autonomous fighter jets. This is the reality of AI in defense. We are pursuing machines that do not hesitate, they do not sleep, they do not fear, and ultimately may not need us. However, for over a decade now, corporate AI ethics statements, government guidelines, and research institutions have all emphasized a common principle. AI should not make life or death decisions, certainly not without human intervention. Unfortunately, the Department of Defense does not share that certainty, and there is no legal prohibition against fully autonomous lethal systems in the United States. DoD policy merely suggests that human oversight remains a key factor. But a factor is not a guarantee. Indeed, the closest the political declaration on responsible military use gets, on use of AI and autonomy gets, is its mandate for a kill switch for unintended behavior. But what defines unintended when a system is programmed to anticipate and adapt to novel situations? And just how will we keep up with this? The answer, of course, if you haven't guessed, is more AI. It seems to be the trend line that we're on. For the AI arms race is not about firepower, it's about speed. It's not just about building better weapons, it is about transforming the entire decision-making process, reducing human error and accelerating the OODA loop. Observe, orient, decide, act. The system that thinks fastest wins. The nation that acts first survives. And chief among these efforts to incorporate AI in our decision-making processes is Project Maven. This was initiated in 2017 as a project that aims to accelerate AI deployment across all branches of the armed forces. It is charged with turning, quote, the enormous volume of data available to the DoD into actionable intelligence and insights. It uses data from across the security infrastructure, and it helps identify military targets, key personnel, and no-strike locations. In fact, information from Project Maven supported Ukraine's early defense, where it was used to identify Russian targets. It did cause a bit of a hullabaloo there, though, as Ukrainian operators discovered humans were still 25% more accurate in determining the targets. Palantir, founded by Peter Thiel, a tech billionaire and an informal Trump advisor, he won the contract, or his company won the contract for Project Maven. Some of their other projects, however, involve collaborating with the military on drone integration, the use of large language models for analysis and decision support, target identification, situational awareness through data visualization, and mission planning. However, as an aside, unlike many of the sci fi references thus far, Palantir is actually named for a magical technology from the Lord of the Rings, crystal balls that allow users to communicate across vast distances. In Tolkien's Elvish, it translates to as to watch over. Another AI forward defense company who names references Lord of the Rings is Lucky Palmer's Anduril. This means Flame of the West, a symbol of good's defiance of evil. Now, most recently, Anduril took over Microsoft's $22 billion DoD contract to build the HoloLens, which is pictured here. It's a wearable augmented reality headset designed for battlefield communications, informatics, navigation, decision making, and drone guidance. Drones, which of course Anduril also produces. More recently, Palantir has partnered with BigBear.ai to integrate 14 legacy information systems into a single AI that they are calling the Global Force Information Management System. This integration is meant to supply a holistic view of the Army's global force to enable risk-informed decision-making capabilities and to support training and mission operations. This is, I suggest, a welcome advance to update these technologies and have the whole of information in one place, so long as the AI can maintain its accuracy, a noted problem with these technologies. Now, beyond enhanced weaponry and decision-making capabilities, a third area of concern for the DoD is cybersecurity, because AI enhances the speed, the complexity, and the effectiveness of cyber warfare. So to combat these threats, the NSA has instituted the Artificial Intelligence Security Center, which is charged with the secure development, integration, and adoption of AI capabilities within the U.S. national security systems and our defense industrial bases, including the prevention of cybercrimes. As part of this, Project Voltron, which is not to be mistaken with the Transformers of the same era, allows for the artificially intelligent detection of vulnerabilities in classified weapons systems so that it can autonomously patch them. We don't need a white hat hacker sitting on the other end of the computer trying to catch these intrusions. Now, this application of AI is necessary in a world of increasingly sophisticated APTs, advanced persistent threats, which are essentially stealthy, long-term hacking campaigns aimed at a specific target and often orchestrated by well-funded groups like nation-states. Now, though the benefits of AI and cybersecurity are numerous, there are decided dangers, particularly as these systems become embedded throughout our defense systems. For instance, adversaries and criminals could steal the underlying data, which would be a security nightmare in a fully integrated system. They could likewise poison that data in order to corrupt the model, resulting then in erratic behaviors. No longer is it supporting our decision-making, it's getting in the way of it. Worse, an internal threat could even intentionally change the model's behavior in order to suit their ends. For instance, just imagine what would happen if an AI was made to mistake our allies for our enemies, or to lead decision makers into a trap. Of course, in face of all of this, AI is also being used to enhance the attacks we're trying to repel. So our solutions must be as nimble as the threats. And if speed is the metric of security, we must protect our lead. To this end, General Howe of Cyber Command, he observes that we must focus on the security of the technology, thinking about it through the lens of the protection of intellectual property, but also defending those models to ensure that they are being used properly. As if to punctuate the point, just last week, OpenAI had to remove several Chinese and North Korean accounts suspected of malicious activities. And this effort to protect our lead includes things like the CHIPS and Science Act, which just last night it was announced is going to be hopefully overturned from the new administration. But this severely curtailed chip availability to China while bolstering domestic manufacturing. Likewise, the testing regimes of the recently rescinded executive order were designed to control the flow of data sets and of information and technological advances to adversarial nations. And yet, we see recent advances out of DeepSeek, a startup that is funded by the Chinese government, calling this approach into question. Despite embargoes on those advanced chips, the ones thought necessary for building frontier models, and despite strict oversight of OpenAI's weights, training data, and architecture, DeepSeek was able to create a model less polished but almost as powerful as ChatGPT's frontier model, ChatGPT 4. It was also 30 times cheaper to build. It can run on a Raspberry Pi, so we don't even need a full sort of computer for it. And it is now freely available to all. This feat is admirable. But it does appear, as a word of caution, that DeepSeek didn't actually train their model from scratch. So we have to take some of those numbers with a grain of salt. Instead, they used a technique called distillation to extract the core weights and biases from OpenAI. And while the irony of OpenAI crying thief is not lost on me, the ability to reverse engineer another company's work so efficiently, it shifts thinking across the board. This includes questions of model design, compute requirements, training resources, and frankly, if closed systems are even possible. DeepSeek also demonstrates how quickly the space advances, how easy it is for new players to emerge overnight, and more pointedly, their rapid success raises the unsettling possibility that if China can develop a near ChatGPT 4 level model with significantly lower compute and cost, what happens when AI warfighting capabilities follow the same trajectory? If massive compute restrictions can be bypassed and model security remains porous, what stops adversarial states or even rogue actors from deploying AI-enhanced cyber warfare, autonomous attack planning, or real-time battlefield adaptation? Unfortunately, the faster something moves, the harder it is to control. And software is more slippery than dirty bombs. Truly, as Kissinger et al. Highlight in Genesis, we're now in a world where threats can arise suddenly and where all it takes is one power outage, one hacker, one failure to cause potentially cataclysmic events. For now, every official statement, every policy directive, every signed agreement ensures us that a human will remain in the loop. But history tells us something else. Restraints in warfare are only ever temporary, not permanent. Because once a technology offers a decisive advantage, there will be a push, whether by generals or strategists or policymakers, to remove those human limitations in the name of efficiency, in the name of security, in the name of survival. But if that tempo exceeds our human speed, if the machines become the architects rather than just tools of battlefield logic, the question is not about who will win. It's whether human control and intent remains part of the war at all. In terms of diplomacy, diplomacy determines whether conflicts escalate into war or resolved through dialogue, because it's through alliances, treaties, and strategic partnerships that nations mitigate their security threats, they foster economic cooperation, and they advance mutual technological progress. Just ask C-3PO, the most famous AI diplomat of all. But more terrestrially speaking, Barack Obama once observed that in a world of complex threats, our security and our leadership depends on all elements of our power, including strong and principled diplomacy. Indeed, global leadership comes not just at the end of the sword, but through the coalition of willing partners. That is, lasting and mutually ensured security depends on diplomacy being privileged over mere defense and military antagonism. And the United States, like many nations, is now grappling with the implication of AI's integration into our diplomacy and our governance. And while we have signed several international agreements regarding AI ethics and defense applications, we have not fully committed to others, such as binding treaties on autonomous weapon systems. For example, in March of 2024, the US led the United Nations to adopt the resolution on seizing the opportunities of safe, secure, and trustworthy artificial intelligence for sustainable development. A resolution that was almost entirely based on the revoked executive order of the same name. This was a success for American diplomacy in leading the way for sustainable and ethical AI. We also signed the September 2024 Framework Convention on Artificial Intelligence and Human Rights, Democracy, and Rule of Law, which is the first legally binding treaty meant to enhance the collaboration of signatories in aligning AI with the extension and preservation of the democratic values we hold so dear. Now, this framework, it obligates us to protect human rights and ensure the integrity of democratic processes. And in service of these obligations, signatories agree to uphold human dignity and autonomy, transparency and oversight, accountability and responsibility, equity and non-discrimination, privacy and personal data protection, reliability and safe innovation, all echoes of the overturned executive order. And while these agreements represent diplomatic success, it's important to acknowledge that they remain recommendations, statements of principles, rather than readily enforceable laws. Indeed, the Framework Convention, the treaty that comes closest to enforceability, contains a proviso. A party is actually not required to apply this convention to activities related to the protection of its national security. Well, given the breadth of what may be considered a national security interest, it seems there's plenty of wiggle room for ignoring the agreement altogether. Of course, George W. Bush once reminded us that for diplomacy to be effective, words must be credible, after which he declared that no one can now doubt the word of America. Unfortunately, doubt is a weed sown by careless words and broken promises. And to this end, the US has recently begun to reject the international order that we have built, not only by removing us from existing agreements, but by striking an antagonistic tone towards our traditional allies. This is most clearly evidenced in the current order to review all multilateral organizations and treaties which the US is party to for cancellation. It seems that the word of the US government, which was once considered the gold standard of international diplomacy, is becoming as ephemeral as crypto, worth $1 billion one day, worthless the next. And in terms of specific AI policies, we have the recent Paris AI Action Summit, where Vice President J.D. Vance not only stressed America's laissez-faire approach to AI development, but tried to cajole our allies into rejecting common sense safeguards and shared values. And this strategy was effective at persuading at least the UK to decline to sign it, in part pointing directly to that US influence. But diplomacy is more than words. It is underwritten by access, intelligence, and analysis. So governments can deploy AI not just to assess foreign military movements, but to model economic ripple effects, anticipate supply chain disruptions, identify threats, and predict how rival states will respond to policy moves. It is likewise used to model the security implications of climate-driven events such as drought and sea level rise. As such, AI systems are becoming increasingly central to our intelligence gathering, predictive analytics, and our scenario planning. And they are likely to become even more deeply enmeshed in our diplomatic efforts. For instance, Big Bear, again, we saw them earlier, has provided the DoD with what they call the Virtual Anticipation Network, or VANE. This is a model that uses over 100,000 traditional and social media news sources, strategic data sets from organizations like the IMF and the World Health Organization, as well as user-supplied data to identify key trends and topics related to adversarial areas of interest. This enables faster, presumably more informed decision-making. It allows us to run simulations and hopefully ultimately strengthen our negotiating hand. They write that using AI may not give our customers a crystal ball, but it will enable them to make better decisions at the right time every time. In another example of AI's use in diplomacy, a 2022 case study from Cambridge University applied machine learning to the Yemen peace negotiations. Here, mediators utilized transcripts from the peace negotiations in order to provide deeper insights into the evolving political positions of the various parties. This helped the mediators identify key issues and relevant actors and thereby facilitated more informed negotiation strategies. This information could very well lead to novel insight and diplomatic breakthrough. However, to train these models requires classified data. This requires a level of trust that the authors of this paper suggest is best cultivated through close collaboration with the model's architects as well as its beneficiaries. And deficits of trust are particularly high hurdles for international collaboration. Yet, in a point of good news, our legislators are thinking about ways to create that trust. Most notably, I point to the Bipartisan AI Accord Act of 2024. This act aimed to build off the Abraham Accords by creating a framework for the US-Israeli-Arab coalition to develop shared AI tools for keeping Iran at bay. It failed as a standalone bill, but its provisions were ultimately incorporated into other bills, such as the Military Appropriations Bill, H.R. 5009. Now, in the best case scenarios, AI will assist with intelligence gathering, analysis, and anticipation. It can be used to simulate negotiations through AI-cloned leaders, assist in immediate translation, and identify previously unthinkable solutions. But we have to be careful in handing over global negotiations to predictive algorithms that have been trained on historical data, because we may be failing to ask whether these frameworks that we use to train the system reflect reality or merely reinforce those past mistakes. So as AI continues to revolutionize international relations, we have to ensure that its implementation aligns with our ethical standards and our global security imperatives. By responsibly integrating it into diplomatic strategies, we can enhance our ability to resolve conflict, to mitigate threat, promote stability, and foster development. While defense prepares for conflict, diplomacy seeks to avoid it. Development addresses the root causes of extremism and a geopolitical tension by focusing on building global security in terms of food, housing, health, education, economic mobility, and political stability. In ensuring that the conditions for peace and prosperity exist, it greases the mechanizations of diplomacy and it reduces those needs for military intervention. And this is why the US has, for decades, invested in initiatives that are aimed to lift economies, to modernize governments, and to integrate developing nations into the global order. These efforts are instruments of humanitarian goodwill and a bulwark against geopolitical instability. Like in Kim Stanley Robinson's Mars trilogy, where computer models help with the terraforming and development of a Martian society, AI is now being positioned as a central component in our efforts to build nations and respond to disaster. Decidedly more difficult task than leveling things with AI-guided munitions. The UN AI Declaration, for example, frames AI as a tool for sustainable development, and it focuses on issues such as food insecurity, healthcare, disaster response, and digital inclusion. Another one, the OECD AI Principles, highlights the roles that AI can play in reducing inequality, fostering digital literacy, and modernizing the public services of our lower income neighbors. Beyond international agreements, the United States Agency for International Development, USAID, has exerted soft power and has encouraged US-aligned stability throughout the world for more than half a century. In service of this mission, USAID developed the AI Global Development Playbook, as well as the Artificial Intelligence Action Plan. both of which document how AI can assist in delivering things like clean energy, improving agricultural productivity, and expanding access to education, among other priorities. It further outlines how aid can be made more effective and cost efficient through the use of machine learning. Some of their sample projects include the streamlining of administrative work, rooting out fraud and waste, and identifying the most fruitful plans and investments. For instance, the Apollo project uses satellite imaging and machine learning to guide agriculturally focused lending decisions in Kenya and Zambia. The Trace TB project in India is using AI to improve detection and treatment adherence for tuberculosis, which saves both lives and money. Finally, the Machine Learning for Peace project scrapes news sources to identify attacks on free speech and representation, thus protecting democratic freedoms, bolstering civil society, and doing this especially in challenging environments. And these initiatives are not merely charitable, they are strategic. And investing in AI driven development is going to allow us to reduce refugee crises, prevent conflicts, and counteract the appeal of extremist ideologies. Moreover, when US assists nations in adopting this type of governance in cybersecurity and their economic systems, it strengthens their resilience against autocratic influences from places like China and Russia. Indeed, the Government AI Readiness Index, it makes clear that nations with robust AI policies are better equipped to resist digital authoritarianism and economic coercion, which is in our security interests. Now, despite these strategic benefits, Trump's Musk-led dismantling of US aid and related development programs marks a rather dramatic shift in our policy. His administration is redirecting billions away from international development, shuttering global research collaborations, and deprioritizing US leadership, at least for AI in sustainable development. The rationale? It's a vision of national interest that defines foreign aid as a waste rather than an investment. But history offers us a stark counterpoint. The Marshall Plan, again, was not charity. It was an anti-Soviet strategy that rebuilt Western Europe into an economic and ideological fortress against communism. And countries that experience rapid economic downturns, such as Venezuela, Syria, and Afghanistan, have become hotbeds for conflict, which further demonstrates the risks associated with underdevelopment. And this same logic applies to AI development today. The US can either shape global AI norms and infrastructure, or it can cede that role to nations with less concern for our interests and our values. And yet, to this end, we would be remiss not to mention the development needs of the United States. Indeed, part of the rhetoric around shuttering US aid, which accounted for less than 1% of the US budget, is that those dollars should instead go to development here at home. And here, the conversation shifts to AI training, infrastructure, and industrial policy, areas that will determine whether or not we remain at the forefront of AI innovation, or if we fall behind more strategically aligned economies. And infrastructure is a key to maintaining this technological edge. And the construction of AI data centers, cloud computing networks, and chip manufacturing facilities will define our ability to harness this technology, which is why initiatives like CHIPS and Science Act were designed to revitalize our semiconductor production, which is a sector critical for AI model training and development. The alternative, reliance on foreign-made chips, leaves us vulnerable to supply chain disruptions and geopolitical leverage from competitors. Likewise, the export of our advanced chips can give competitors a leg up, though again, with DeepSeek, the embargoes might actually also act as a creative catalyst for advancements in the technology. Beyond protecting chip technology and spurring US manufacturing, that 2025 executive order on advancing United States leadership in artificial intelligence infrastructure, the last order that Biden signed before leaving office, remains in place. This order established a roadmap for the aggressive development of a publicly backed but privately run AI data centers and power plants. Recently, it has materialized as OpenAI, Oracle, and SoftBank's Stargate project, an effort that has continued under the Trump administration. Now, previous executive orders on AI further prioritize things like workforce training, research investments, and public-private partnerships to ensure that our talent is cultivated locally and domestically rather than lost to international competition. As such, AI education initiatives expanded, particularly in STEM fields, aiming to equip the next generation with the expertise to develop, regulate, and deploy AI responsibly. However, the repeal of that order, which mandated those things, alongside other changes at the Department of Education and the revocation of research grants, is already creating a funding vacuum in regards to AI education and workforce training. In fact, these policies are already starting to result in a brain drain on our US universities. Finally, while there's an incredible focus on training in STEM fields and across industry, I submit we should do more to encourage involvement from the humanities, even if they prove antagonistic to these efforts. Indeed, that antagonism, I suggest, is necessary in ensuring that the machines that we devise, they help maintain rather than erode our humanity, and they help safeguard democracy against disinformation, manipulation, and disruption. In this increasingly generated world, it may also be the case that authentic human experiences of things like, I don't know, beauty, awe, love, and wonder find their real worth. After all, the humanities are responsible for the very things we're looking to secure in the first place. So we've looked at AI in defense, diplomacy, and development. But if we stop there, we miss the forest for the trees. For we fail to consider the erosion of the very thing that we are trying to secure in the first place: our culture, our individuality, and our form of governance. That is, our democratic stability. Now, this fourth dimension need not be a democracy in the Western liberal sense. After all, other global powers do not necessarily operate within that same framework. In this case, the fourth D can be read as domestic stability, which refers more broadly to the legitimacy and resilience of a government in the face of external and internal pressures. As such, we come to what I see as our most existential threat of all: AI's capacity to warp human perception and destabilize democracy, not through brute force, but through the quiet erosion of reality itself. This ability to manipulate information, to shape public opinion, to disrupt social cohesion, threatens stabilities in ways as profound as those in which it threatens our physical security. If AI is rewriting the logic of war and of global sort of power, it is also rewriting the human mind, how we think, how we decide, how we trust. In doing so, it may end up dragging us deeper into what I call the age of psychosis. This age started with the advent of the internet and its promises to democratize information. Social media was a further spur to this, as vast amounts of information we put online led directly to the algorithmic or attention economy. And through these means, siloed ecosystems of information emerged, first by choice, our decisions, and later by machine decree. In these echo chambers, we have laid the foundation for social fragmentation, political extremism, conspiratorial narrative, the obfuscation of truth, and appeals to the worst parts of human nature. Things like ego, anger, jealousy, and lust. Appeals that are particularly potent when the world seems unmoored. Just consider the 2016 Cambridge Analytica scandal, in which misused data from Facebook allowed the Trump campaign to psychographically identify and present alternative and sometimes contradictory positions to highly specified audiences. Using AI to mine this personal data, political consultants weren't just advertising candidates, they were reshaping the electorate, nudging millions toward tailored narratives designed to inflame, to provoke, and divide. This was 8 years ago, and that technology has since evolved into something exponentially more powerful, allowing it to intuit otherwise undisclosed information, to read our emotions from things like video and image and audio recordings, and, a la the Minority Report, even predict our behaviors. Coupled with the ability for large language models to pass the Turing test, and what we see as increasingly autonomous agents, we find ourselves in a brave new world of ideological manipulation. And perhaps you've seen the studies. Facebook researchers quietly admitting they can influence elections. Experiments showing that subtle changes to search rankings can alter voter behavior. TikTok's algorithm determining which protests go viral and which quietly vanish into the void. The media landscape is no longer shaped by politics, it is politics. And perhaps most frightening example of what is to come can be found in XAI's advisor Dan Hendryck's development of a way to measure and alter the political bias of an AI, which in turn can bias the electorate. And this paves the way for authoritarian impulse and manipulation, providing further reason to distrust the architects of this new reality. But if the worst we had to fear was the siloing or the animosity of anonymity, we'd probably be okay. But now we also have to face off against the threat of deepfakes, these believable but fabricated videos, images, and voices that are capable of putting voices and words into a politician's mouth, manufacturing scandal, and even creating entire fictional events. Likewise, the internet is increasingly filled with AI slop, populated by bots that have corporate and political agendas, making it impossible to be certain that what we're seeing is even real. We can no longer believe our eyes in the way that we once could. And when the sources of our knowledge are increasingly synthetic, we enter a kind of epistemic freefall. These developments make it easier to follow the lead of Orwell's 1984, as AI can now spin propaganda and feed the memory hole without us, making things like Kellyanne Conway's fake news and alternative facts feel almost quaint. At least in 1984, a human did the manipulation. And though not as overtly authoritarian as China's social credit system, or as repressive as North Korea's censorship, social media feeds no longer show us the world as it is, but as it is predicted that we wanted. And given the nearly unavoidable effects of things like confirmation bias, mass appeal, the recency primacy effect, and other psychological mechanisms, this algorithmic economy relies on platforms that don't simply respond to our preferences, but have begun to shape them, reinforcing bias, deepening divides, and fracturing our shared social truths. If the internet was the ideological apparatus par excellence, machine learning is transforming it into something akin to the architect in the Matrix, a sole algorithm that programs our reality. And so we find ourselves in the age of psychosis, a time where the line between the real and the artificial blurs, and public discourse collapses under the weight of competing realities. It is an era where the truth is no longer an absolute, but an algorithmic preference, where the narratives we consume are tailored not for accuracy, but engagement, where our worlds are not broadened, but constrained by these echo chambers, where our cognitive biases are weaponized against us and conspiracies are cultivated, where our very cognitive function is at risk. And sadly, this happened or started even before generative AI. US literacy was already on the decline. Attention spans were shortening, and our performance on global academic benchmarks was suffering. This was in part due to a decades-long war on education, but it is also due to the ease with which we can access seemingly authoritative information and ready-made answers, our Reddit forums, and our life hacks, our influencers, and our spammed reviews. Now, if it's true that nations with higher literacy rates and stronger education systems tend to have lower crime rates, higher civic engagement, and stronger institutions, our trajectory may be questionable. And following this path of least resistance is an evolutionary adaptation, but it's also our Achilles heel. And there's already evidence that the widespread adoption of AI might harm us. For instance, one study examining AI's impact on creativity suggests that though AI can help raise the baseline of creative work, it also ends up homogenizing that work. Relatedly, another study shows that subjects prefer AI-generated poetry to human-composed verse, precisely because the poetry is more generic and self-evidently structured. That is, we don't have to work for it, and that ease registers as enjoyment. Even more troubling, a Microsoft study from just a couple weeks ago suggests that employees who regularly use AI experience an erosion of their focus, their attention to detail, and their critical engagement with their thinking tasks. In other words, critical thinking atrophies without regular practice, rendering us even more susceptible to ideological manipulation and division. And all of this makes the 2006 satire Idiocracy one of the most haunting science fiction parallels of our moment. Though it is meant to be a comedic exaggeration, the film appears uncomfortably prescient as it depicts a future in which critical thinking skills have disappeared. Culture reverts to our most base drives towards sex and violence, and politics has been reduced to meme-driven spectacle, where the most powerful voices are the loudest and not the most thoughtful. Governance in this imagined future is determined not by competence, but by entertainment value and corporate sponsorship. Now, AI is not the cause of this trajectory, but it is an accelerant, as we offload thinking tasks to an unthinking machine. And we reap the titillation of the sensational over the substantive, the divisive over the unifying, and the quick dopamine hit over slow contemplation. So while our digital influences may not force us into idiocracy, they make the path much easier. And so the age of psychosis is not inevitable. But to change course is going to require not just better policies, but a cultural shift, one that asserts human agency over the tools that we have built and the markets that fuel them. So let me offer this final dose of reality. A reminder that the future is not inevitable. We are not passive actors in this drama. We are not merely subjects of AI. We are its designers, its users, and its regulators. We decide whether we let AI mediate our reality unchecked, or whether we build institutions capable of preserving our shared foundation of truth. But this requires us to recognize snake oil when we taste it. Indeed, whether it's the unkept promises of technological marvel, the perpetually shifting definitions of artificial general intelligence, or the immense fallibility of the tools as they exist, replete with bias, hallucination, and unpredictability, we must become literate, not just of the technological capabilities and shortcomings, but the motivations and inspirations of their architects. It also means recognizing the law of accelerating returns and that the technology is evolving at an astonishing rate. And though we still need to now develop new approaches and architecture to get past some current limitations we're starting to see in things like data, scaling costs, etc., the simple fact is that despite the language we use to describe these machines, they are not actually thinking or reasoning in the first place. And so from this perspective, public commentary on AI tends to remind me of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. On the one hand, you have Marvin the paranoid android, a depressive though wildly intelligent AI companion who can solve many of the protagonist's problems, if only he can be bothered. On the other hand, there is Eddie the computer, who possesses a relentlessly upbeat enthusiasm, even in the face of danger. And in a passage that reminds me of AI's loudest cheerleaders, he's described as brash and cheery, as if selling detergents. Now, between these two perspectives is deep thought, pictured here. A computer designed to compute the answer to the ultimate question of life, the universe, and everything. And after computing for 7.5 million years, it delivers its famous answer, 42. An answer that is both true and completely meaningless without the right framing. When asked for that framing, deep thought tells us, well, that requires further computation. Computation that requires an even bigger, indeed a planetary-sized computer. A computer called Earth. A computer that in the novel is destroyed to make way for an interstellar highway mere minutes before delivering its answer. And this is the moment that we're in. We can have all of the data, all of the computation, and all of the AI in the world, but if we do not ask the right questions, if we do not shape this future with intentionality, with foresight, with wisdom, then we are no better than the malfunctioning AIs in Hitchhiker's Guide, generating answers that mean nothing in a world that is coming apart at the seams. And those questions, as deep thought makes clear, begins with us. So in the pursuit of U.S. defense, diplomacy, development, and democracy, we have to remain skeptical of the industry's claims, and we have to institute thoughtful regulation. And we have to take a degree of personal responsibility for the way this all unfolds. Because at the end of the day, the greatest question AI poses to our security is not one of technological capability, but of human will. For only we can put the I into AI. Intention, imagination, integrity, and yes, intelligence. Our security, may the very things we hope to secure, our humanity and our country's character demands it. Thank you.